Good evening and welcome to this edition of Discuss the Bible. And we're going to be talking here tonight about the story of David and Goliath. And particularly, we're going to be talking about battling the giants in our own lives. And what I've done is I've taken, a while back, I wrote a book that for devotions for survivors of abuse and trauma. And I wanted to keep it very brief. And so each one of the little installments is about 500 words. I tell people it's good bathroom reading, but I wanted it to be something that's meaningful for people on their journey to healing and recovering following trauma and abuse. And who hasn't gone through some sort of trauma in life? And that's what we want to do. We want to provide you some hope along the way. So I'm going to be discussing this topic tonight with my guests. And I have all four of the ladies here this evening. Hello, ladies. How are you doing?
Hello.
So it's good to see you. So how have you been since the last time we saw you?
Can't complain.
Well, I bet you can. I bet your husband said
Don't ask him, okay?
I bet if we asked him, he would say, "Oh yeah, she can complain. I've heard her complain plenty of times." But hey, I need to get one other screen set up. So let's. I forgot to do it in advance of the broadcast, but let me see.
We lost your audio.
Yeah.
So now we got Janice and Kelly. Let me get, and then we have Lorene and Nikki. Come on, what am I doing? What am I doing? I gotta do this. There we go. There we go. We got it. So let's go back over here and let the story that we're looking at here tonight is about David and Goliath. And we're using that as kind of a motif for us when it comes to battling the giants in our own lives. And when you stop and think about it, we all get beat up by life. Every one of us. And some people have a different story to tell, but we all have, we're all the same in this respect, is that we have disappointments and heartbreaks and struggles and problems that come in our lives. Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 16, verse 33, he says, "In this world you will have trouble." So, and that trouble typically is not just, the stub your toe type of trouble. It's the type of trouble that can really knock the wind out of us completely. Why would the story, and this is not in one of our discussion questions, but why would the story of David and Goliath have any application or give us insight to facing the challenges that we face?
We all have giants in our life.
Okay, yeah. And Janice is dealing with a little bit of a giant right now in her life, and she's looking at the prospect of having a series of surgeries, and those things can kind of really knock the wind out of you. So somebody else was going to say something.
The Philistines coming against them was a pretty big deal.
And so it's the enemies in our lives that can, in this case, the spiritual enemies that we face. Well, let's just go ahead and let's watch the video that we have. It's only a couple minutes, and then we will continue on with our discussion here this evening. So let me cue up the video and let me see if I can get it to work right.
Beating Goliath when a whole nation of warriors failed? Was it due to his skill as a fighter? Certainly David knew how to work a sling. That was part of his argument that he offered his king to be allowed to go and face Goliath. David had fought and killed both lion and bear while tending his father's flocks. But up to this time, he had never faced a man in battle. And war is different than shepherding. Besides, there were plenty of seasoned and skilled warriors in the camp. Yet none of them stepped up to fight Goliath. So if it wasn't skill that set David apart, what was it? When David faces the Philistine, he says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45. David faces Goliath with just a sling and a few stones, but his full confidence rests in God. David adds, "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47. It's true, the battle belongs to the Lord, but the victory comes only to those who in faith step out from their hiding places and face the giant. Abuse leaves us confused, intimidated, and afraid. Like the Israelites of David's time, we might fear taking action. But the secret to recovery and healing is remembering that the battle is the Lord's. He will help us succeed when we no longer choose to live in fear but step out in faith and act. We just may be surprised at how quickly and easily some of the giants who kept us frozen in our tracks will fall. Remember this Bible verse, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's Isaiah 41, verse 10. This reading is from Kerry Decker's book, Healing for the Wounded Heart. You can find it on Amazon.
So there we have it. So let's go ahead and work through our questions that we have here. So it says, read 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 4, and verse 24. What was the main challenge that the Israelites faced when confronted by Goliath and the Philistine army?
Fear. I said fear.
Fear. Now, why did you say that?
Because they were afraid. That guy was big.
6 cubits.
Yeah, somebody needs to take care of him. You go first. Yeah. So let's go ahead and read that passage. Who has that passage handy? Anybody?
I do.
All right, go ahead and read for us, please.
Okay. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes. I don't know how to pronounce these.
That's fine.
Between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites the other, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span.
Okay. And so, how about verse 24? Did you do that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So
whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear.
Yeah. So you get the picture here is that they're squaring off for battle. It's that Janice and I, whenever we watch various historical dramas, that we always talk about how that warfare was such a different animal back in the day when you'd march out against the enemy. And I'm thinking that particularly like the Revolutionary War or whatever, and you'd march out against the enemy, and they'd march out, and there would be a line of guys over here and a line of guys over there, and then they'd have their volleys. You have your one group of people who was shooting, and the other ones would reload, and it's just a matter of time before you catch a bullet in the head. So, and that in warfare, Of course, in that in that day and age was completely different because there were no bullets. The way you did it is that you went down and you mixed it up with your enemy, hand to hand combat, and whacking away, until somebody decided to turn tail and run, or you destroyed them all. Goliath was he decided, hey, let's just settle this the easy way, and you pick your best guy, and he'll come out and fight me, and if he beats me, then we'll serve you, but if I beat him, then you'll serve us. So we talk about the fear. What Let's talk a little bit about the psychology of these warriors, and we'll get into that as we go along. But what are some of the additional challenges that they faced in thinking about Goliath, in addition to the fear that they had?
He was a big guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the commercials with that Shaq guy, and if you see him on a regular commercial, you don't think too much. But when they put him in a room of other people, he is humongous, and he's not even 9 feet tall. But it's like he could just like crush you,
Yeah.
And how intimidating that would be. And then the armor. I mean, they were describing all the armor that he was on. Holy cow, you couldn't even get to him. You couldn't even get to his body because of all the
Yeah.
I'm sure it's very intimidating.
You have to stab in the ankle.
Yeah.
And I think the consequences of if they lost.
Yeah, you don't want that to be on you.
Right. Thinking, change their whole life.
Yeah. How much did limited thinking play into all of this?
I think most of it.
Mm-hmm.
They really limited themselves, and
They not only limited themselves, but they also limited God. It's one thing to think, well, I know I can't do this, but it's quite a different thing to think that I know that God won't deliver us in that. And so, and that really, when it comes to, we have a lot of self-imposed limitations when it comes to facing the big things in our life. So, let's go ahead and do the next one. Why do you think the seasoned warriors in the Israelite camp were unwilling to fight Goliath despite their military skills? Because, some of these guys were probably pretty intimidating. But, what held them back?
Maybe just that idea of having to go alone. When they were an army with the United, there was a team around them and all that. That's one thing. But when they called out one person to come, that would be hard to those ranks.
Yeah.
It's not only the issue of fear there you're talking about, but also response. You're carrying the weight of the whole nation on your shoulders. That if I fail, we all go down in flames, And there's not a whole lot of people that, with the exception of David here, that is willing to sign up for that type of responsibility. So, but read First Samuel 17:45. How did David's perspective on the battle differ from the rest of the Israelite soldiers? What gave him the confidence to face Goliath? What's 45 say?
David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied."
Yeah. So how is his perspective different than Goliath's.
He
It's
had
almost
so much faith. Sorry,
Yeah.
Nikki.
No, that's fine. So he had so much faith. Yeah.
So much faith, and he trusted God so much, especially
Mm-hmm.
for such a young person, And I thought maybe he spent his time out there shepherding with the Lord. He
Mm-hmm.
probably had a lot of solitude out there and had a really close relationship with him.
Yeah.
And then he fought that bear and lion.
Mm-hmm.
Who
Mm-hmm.
could do that? I just
Yeah.
am in awe of how much faith he had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to look up a Bible verse that came to my mind, but I'm not seeing it just yet.
What were you going to say, Nikki?
it didn't even occur to him that he was going to lose. It seems like
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
really. You know, and it was
And the first thing he does is calls on the Lord, which is not what the first thing that the other soldiers, the other Israelites were doing. They were just thinking of how are they going to do it on their own.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And um and that's the key difference between Goliath and David, is that Goliath was full of self-confidence and David was full of God confidence. Go ahead, Janice.
I doubt if anyone had ever confronted Goliath before in his whole life.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He'd probably
Yeah.
been able to bully his way through everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Well, and I was thinking of like the military people, they probably were used to having all these victories. And so after you have that, you begin to think it's you. You hit,
Mhm.
it's your own skill and your own way of doing it that give you the victory.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
God is the one who gave us the victory. We just used what we had. But I can just see how, I know our own military, and there's this strength that they can do this on their, by their own
Mm-hmm.
strength. And I just could see that being the same,
Yeah.
thinking that
Yeah.
they won the before. Why couldn't they? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the passage I was looking for earlier is in the book of Psalms. It's Psalm 20, verse 7, and it says this: "Some nations boast of their chariots and horses, but we boast in the name of the Lord our God." And then it goes on to say, there it is. Yeah. And so hang on, I'm almost there. And it says, those nations, so the nations that just are confident of their own military might, will fall down and collapse, but we will rise up and stand firm. And so the path to true victory, and I believe in having a strong military. I think that is important. But the path to true victory is truly having a strong confidence, a God confidence, and not just being assured of your own strength and military might. So, what role did David's faith in God play in his willingness to confront the giant? How can we cultivate a similar reliance on God in our own lives? Obviously, faith played, and we've talked about that. So let's kind of focus a little bit more on that second part of that question about how can we cultivate a similar reliance on God in our own lives. Maybe before you answer it, maybe let's reflect a little bit on what was David's secret to having a strong faith. Janice, what you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think one thing with David is that just like we talked about before, God protected him when he fought against the bear and the lion and all these things. So he had history with God.
Yeah.
He saw how God saved him through those things, and he truly believed because he already knew that God was there with him.
Yeah, I like that statement that you used there, that he had a history with God. And that's the problem with so many people today, is that they don't have a history with God. And so obviously they're going to freak out when they confront a problem that's bigger than their ability to resolve. Lorene?
Well, I have a history with God, and I still let the giants get to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seriously, I always turn to fear, and the fear is what turns my anxiety into giants. And instead of just, God has this, I don't need to worry so much about, how it's going to happen. He's going to get me through this, no matter what. And I just forget it every time. I just forget it. And I want to be one who, I want to remember it. I want to remember it forever, how he's been
Yeah,
so faithful and so good through my whole life.
that's true. And there's an important kind of like there's an important nuance to all of this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Janice, you got a comment?
Well, I really agree with what Lorene said. It's so true. And I think that one reason why that happens, at least to me, is because when I start feeling those giants, that giant fear, it's so easy for me just to start isolating myself and not like going to anyone and saying, I'm having this difficult, time, and I need someone to walk through me or anything. I just do it by myself, and then that's when the giants start whispering all kinds of crazy things into your head, and you believe it, and you start getting more and more fear, and then it takes you further away from God.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we got to be careful, and I'm not disputing what Lorene says, but I think that we have to be careful that we can go through life with a fearless perspective. Now, like I say, I'm not saying that that's what Lorene says, but I'm reminded of Jesus when he's in Gethsemane, and there's a passage of scripture that always or oftentimes troubled me until I began to understand it a little bit more. But he's praying in Gethsemane, and this is the time right before his crucifixion, and Jesus didn't. I don't think that Jesus had a full understanding of what the crucifixion was going to be like until he went through it. I think he knew that this is going to be horrible, but there's one thing about knowing that something's really, really bad, and quite a different thing about going through that experience. And he is assembled with some of his friends and disciples, and he says, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." Another passage in the Gospels about that, it says, "My soul is crushed with grief," or my, I guess I got that wrong. It's but the idea of being overwhelmed. Now he wasn't overwhelmed to the point where he gave in to despair, but he was really not looking forward to walking through the experience.
Is that when he said, "Take this cup from me"?
Yeah. Nevertheless, it's not what I want, but what you want.
Sure.
Janice.
But even Jesus reached out to his friends at that time and said, "Come and pray with me." They
Even
weren't
though
there
that
for him, but
even
he
though that
asked. I think he knew in his heart that's what he needed. He needed people. He needed his friends to help him. But they didn't.
there's so much stuff that when we kind of like, I think that everybody, Christian or non-Christian, particularly when we have chosen to follow Jesus, we come to that we embark on that journey with a lot of our own kind of preconceptions about what the journey is going to be like. I think it's really instructive that Jesus at that time in Gethsemane went to his Father in prayer, but he needed people around him. He wanted people to be around him for support, and he wasn't just saying, "Oh, don't worry, God's got this." He was saying, he said, "I need the help of God, but I need your help as well." And I think that we oftentimes downplay the importance of support, of human support in the church, and particularly when we're facing a challenge. How easy or difficult is it for you to reach out to others and ask them to stand with you when you're facing a challenge? Go ahead.
My hand.
Just,
The last
just
time
put it in front of your face.
Where is it?
No, you just, if you do it right in front of your face, we can, there you
I
go.
know you lean this way, but the thing leans that way.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
So the
Go
last
ahead.
bout of something I had, I think, was breast cancer for about a month. And, I've asked for prayer in the past, but a lot of times for our prayer group at church, I think, oh, I don't need to ask people to pray. I'll be fine. And the last time, I think there was one time I didn't, and somebody else put me on there without me asking them. I think it was this last time. Anyway, it all turned out really well. And for
Yeah.
some reason, this time, I really felt the love of the church. People were calling me and texting me, and I really felt that support. And I actually got up and gave a testimony because I just wanted them to know how thankful I was. But I normally would say, oh, you don't need to worry everybody about this. People have bigger problems, than this. And
Yeah. What is that about us that we tend to downplay? Because it's true. If you really stopped and thought about that statement logically, well, people have bigger problems, then the logical outcome of that is that only the person with the biggest problem is, gets
yeah,
to ask for prayer. And
right.
then, and how do you determine whose problem's the
Yeah, ask
biggest?
them.
Yeah. Take a number. It's kind of like you're at the DMV.
31 flavors. Yeah.
Yeah. Take a number, and you look at it, and now serving number 3, and you're number 78. Go ahead, Lorene.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I remember growing up in a church where you didn't ask for help, and you weren't even encouraged that. You were to pray for others, but I don't want to, it's not a blame thing. It's just I did not learn how to ask for help when I was younger. And I had to learn, and I learned this through this program called Celebrate Recovery, that I learned how to ask my group to pray for me, or to, just let me say my stuff. Sometimes that was all I needed, was just to say it, but I had to learn to do that. And it's the best thing I've ever learned, was to ask for, and I still not good at asking for help. I'm not good at it, but I'm trying more than I ever have before to ask for help when I need it. So
Yeah. So Janice.
Maybe it's true because we're from the last of the generation where the women didn't normally have a career, but we did everything else we had like so many careers all piled on us that we didn't work outside of the home, but we did everything. We took
Mm-hmm.
care of the kids, we did the cooking, we mowed the yard, we, you know, smogged the cars and worked and taught Sunday school and volunteered for everything and cooked for people who were sick, and we did everything, you know. And you just were so into the whole servant thing that I don't think we really thought that we mattered.
Yeah. 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 It's hard to have that type of reliance on God, and I think that comes from the support of community.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously we need to attend to our our personal relationship with God, but we also need to have people around who know our hearts, not just the strong parts, but also the weak parts and where we're struggling. And I think, go ahead, Janice.
I think that's another thing is that, I'm woman, hear me roar kind of a thing, like we could do everything. We don't need help, you
Mm-hmm,
know?
mm-hmm,
And for me, and probably maybe for Lorraine, is like when Celebrate Recovery started and we got involved in that, where we shared our lives with with a group of women. Until then, that had been kind of a foreign thing to us, but it's, I believe with all my heart that that's exactly what we all need.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So go ahead, Kelly.
I think for me too, part of it is being introverted because sometimes you don't want all the attention. Sometimes you just want to be by yourself, and so you
Yeah.
kind of keep things to yourself, thinking, "Oh, everybody
Mm-hmm.
just leave me alone."
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
you really do need that support.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Janice.
And a lot of times, something that you might think that you're the only one who feels this way.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else feels all this resentment, or they don't feel all this other feelings that I feel. I'm just the worst one. And then if you get into a group and you start talking and you find out,
Yeah.
everybody has questions to answer, and you find out you all have the same exact problems.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure. So the text mentions the battle belongs to the Lord. What does this mean, and how can we apply this principle to our own struggles and challenges? Janice?
I'm sorry I'm talking so much.
No, that's fine.
But when
It's a lot better than silence.
well, I've been thinking about this one this week
Mm-hmm.
because I've been trying to just handle my stuff myself,
Mm-hmm.
and like asking God to help me, but not, not really giving it to Him, I guess. And I just prayed today. I just said, I can't do this. I just can't do this by myself, you know, and I need your help. And I need you to hold me up through this. And I felt better after I had that time of prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's think about God for a moment, because the thing there's a few things about God that really mystify us. One is that why He allows what He allows to have happen in our life. Now, I don't think that He customizes each challenge that we face and say, oh, I think that what you need this year is breast cancer, and what you need this year is hip replacement, and so on and so forth. I do think that, now, does He know that that's what's going to happen? Yes. But it's not like He's up in heaven parceling out problems to people. So, but nevertheless, He allows those things to happen. And some of those things are just really horrific things, because, at the end of the day, I can understand the protest that people have, that why didn't He stop this? You know, and here in Southern California right now, we've been going through this ongoing battle with these wildfires. And God could send the rain. He could wash it all out and extinguish it, and so on and so forth. But there are certainly things, and there are people who if we grant that, the power of God, so to speak, to do this type of stuff, then people are left with the confusion that, well, if God can but he doesn't, then what type of God is that? But what if we granted this notion that that God is good all the time, and all the time God is good, that God is always loving, he never allows anything to happen in our lives that doesn't serve his loving purposes, and God is all knowledgeable, whatever. And that has been beneficial to me to know that I may never ever know why God allowed whatever problems that he has allowed in my life, because all of this may fit together in a bigger plan than I just even have the capacity to understand. But what if we just had that bedrock confidence that God is good, that God is loving, that God is all powerful, and God knows what's best, and he's achieving that. How would that change our perspective on the battles that we have to fight? Go ahead, Lorene.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing to try to get into our heads, that no matter what happens, God is with us. So even when there's a fire, even when there's a flood, even when there's breast cancer, even when my child dies, even when my kids go astray, God is there. He
Mm-hmm.
is there. The battle is his. So he knows how to fix it. I don't know if that's the right word, but he knows,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to remember that he's with us. And that's where I forget. That's what I forget, is that no, he's with me in this, even though
Yeah.
it's so horrible and I don't want to go through this stuff and blah blah blah. He's there with me going through it, and he's going to be there on the other side no matter what happens, no matter
Yeah.
what.
Yeah. Janice?
Yeah, and I think that the part that really I need to keep telling myself is it's because he loves me. He cares. His heart breaks for me when my heart is broken, you know?
Mm-hmm.
He it's not like he's a God who is just controlling everything. It's that he cares about me, you know? And there's so many verses in the Bible that say that,
Mm-hmm.
and just cast all your cares on him because he cares for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's always going to be there for us. He gives us that peace that we can't even begin to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So, have you ever faced a giant in your life, whether it be a physical, emotional, or spiritual challenge? How did you approach that situation, and what lessons can you draw from David's experience? Well, I know for myself, I've experienced a few giants. My giants have never been in here again, compared to other people's that have never been as menacing as what some people have faced. But they're my giants, you know. And I know for me, one was circumstantial with the loss of employment in a very ugly way, but also another one was kind of an emotional and a just a personal challenge for me and my spiritual life that I prayed and 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 prayed about, but it's never resolved. And so the what has helped me in all of these things, and it kind of circles back to what Janice says, and it's really the secret sauce that David had, is that David had a personal history with God, and he just knew that God was good. He just really delighted in the Lord, and 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 that's the only way you can get through some of these things, is to have that type of confidence in God. It's kind of interesting, and I know that I may be rambling, but what else is new is that the problem is going to happen anyway, with or without God. I mean, for instance, the baby's going to die with or without God. The cancer is going to come with or without God. The loss of employment is going to happen with or without God. So it's not so much that belief, and I don't have a deterministic belief that all problems are destined to happen, but I do believe that what I've seen, and I've seen a lot as a minister, I've seen the people who have a strong connection with God weather those things better than those who don't.
Yes.
But we got a few more questions here. Let's just go ahead and hit those. The text in the devotional reading states that abuse leaves us confused, intimidated, and afraid. How can the story of David and Goliath offer hope and encouragement to those who have experienced abuse or trauma? Janice.
Maybe that just the hope that this isn't a giant that's so big that it can't be overcome.
Yeah. Good. That's exactly what I was thinking. No, it really is. Is that Goliath is not invincible.
Yeah, it makes me almost cry because when I said that, I was thinking about the tiny little girls in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who had giants that were bigger than anything I would ever have to face in my whole entire life.
Mm-hmm.
They needed to know that they could get past that they could overcome it.
Yeah.
That God could overcome it.
Yeah. Noreen?
Yeah, and I think the key right there is when you're in that abusive, confused, and intimidated, you don't know that there's other options. And that's why we need people that come in and say, look, there's some ways we can get through this. You're not going to ever forget it. You're never, I don't even know if you can forgive it, but here's some steps we can help you with, or I can come alongside of you and help you with these steps, because it's not just what you're thinking. You're stuck in your abuse and you don't know how to get out. And I think that's so important to have people around us who will help us when we get stuck.
Yeah. Something is going to be predominant in our thinking, and it's either going to be the power of the giant or the power of God. But and that doesn't mean it's easy, man. I've witnessed it firsthand. People who struggle, but the good news is that they keep struggling their way through it. Read 1 Samuel 17:15. Somebody have 17:50. Does somebody have that?
I have it, but I don't always want to be the person. If somebody else wants to read,
You were that girl in class. so 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 you can be that woman in our group.
okay. I get my glasses here. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him.
Yeah. So what does the Bible verse from Isaiah 41:10? So do not fear, for I am with you. Teach us about God's presence and support in the midst of our struggles.
The adversary says God's not there.
Yeah. And the giant's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and at the end of the day, it oftentimes, you know, if you look at life, at the end of the big picture of life, at the end of the day, it does look like the giant wins. The cancer destroys, the car wreck maims, mutilates, and kills. The fentanyl stops hearts, and on, you know. So it looks like every time the giant wins, but he doesn't in our relationship with God. Because even though profound tragedies can befall us and ultimately take our lives, there's that passage of scripture in the book of Romans chapter 8 that talks about you know, that we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. And so neither death nor life, and so on and so forth. That God knows how to defeat the final giant in our life. You know, and even when we're faced with an incurable disease that God doesn't remit miraculously, he says, don't worry. He says, I know how to get you to the place where you'll never face cancer or another car wreck or even a murderer again.
Yeah.
You know. So, okay. Kelly.
Yes, like you said, I always say how difficult it must be for people that don't have God to get through all these things. And then ultimately, like you say, you know, they don't have that peace if they don't have God.
And at the end of the day, they don't get through it. You know, I mean, really.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
at the end of the day, you know, I think so. You know, and I've preached about this a lot, and my own family always says you're such a downer. You know, but think of how miserable it would be that if all you had was the prospect of aging and then dying, if that's what your future held, you know, because I'm not a big fan of getting older, you know, and and I'm not a big fan of dying. But if think of how bleak existence would be if that's what the final chapter, if that was the end of the story,
Right.
you know. So, okay. How can developing a strong faith in God and relying on His strength help us overcome our fears and step out in faith, even when facing daunting circumstances? Well, I think we've talked a lot about that already tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I do have one other
Glory to
thought.
glory.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you mean by that, Kelly?
I just see each time we get something, we get more faith. You know, each time we
Mm-hmm.
tackle a challenge with Him. We get more faith. One time, my pastor's wife, I talked to her about a medical issue. I was trying to make a decision, and she said, I want you to sit and write down everything God has done for you in your life and cry. And I want you to ask yourself, why don't you think He'll do that for you again?
Yeah.
And it just, every time something happens, you just get more faith. Finally, to where you just trust Him. It's like a light bulb went on in my head one time. What choice do you have but to trust Him? Your life is in His hands.
Yeah.
So you just trust Him. But yeah, it reminds me of from glory to glory,
Yeah.
our faith grows and our hearts get stronger. We get closer to Him.
Yeah. Yeah. So I teach this group, or I lead a discussion group on this very same topic on Tuesday nights, and I've said it many times before, but I think it applies to this situation here too. Is that while it's true that the battle belongs to the Lord, the fight is really our responsibility. God, very seldom does God just say, sit down. Now, on occasion in history, He's done that, and maybe in your own personal life. But very seldom does He say, just sit down and pray. That's all. No, you got to go to the doctor's appointment. You got to you got to do the hard work from your side,
Right.
and through all of that, you trust and believe that God is going to, He's going to be that good, loving, all-knowing, compassionate God is going to bring about His good purposes. Finally, it says, how can this discussion and the insights gained from the text inspire you to grow in your faith and trust in God even when facing your own giants?
I truly want to be able to say it is well with my soul, no matter what. No matter what's going on, it's well with my soul.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Like Paul.
yeah. Go ahead, Janice.
I think too, when you think about David, being out there with the sheep and everything, it says that he would sing and he would pray and he would worship God. So he had a really close relationship with Him, and that's what I think for me that I would want more.
Yeah.
Kelly, you had a comment?
That's what I was going to say. More intimacy with God and being in His Word more, I think, gives you more faith. And David was so young for having no doubt.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. So he had to have that relationship. Plus, where God says He didn't give us a spirit of fear, is it possible that He gave David an extra dose of that? Or, He gives you a measure of faith. Did He give David an extra dose? I don't know.
It's quite possible. I don't know. I mean, there are people that I know who it just seems like it's easier for them.
Yeah.
So, well, ladies, I appreciate your comments tonight and even being vulnerable on about what been talking about. And I hope that you will join us next week. We have another study coming up, and we'll just keep on going through these until we take a break and maybe get back into the chosen. We'll have to see how all of that fits together. So, any comments that you'd like to make before we wrap up tonight?
Thank you, ladies. And Kerry.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank
All
you,
right.
everybody.
There you go. There you go. So, well, it's always a delight to spend some time talking about important issues. And, certainly there are no more important issues than thinking in terms of how God can equip us and carry us through the realities that we face in life. And I hope that you have discovered that for yourself. And, and if you haven't, maybe one of the things you can do is that you can direct message me on the platforms where you're watching this and say, I would like to talk more about this. And we can have a chance to chat about your own spiritual journey. I would encourage you also to check us out online on Sundays, and also the replays for that. But at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings Pacific time is when I share the message. And I'm kind of interested. I'm interested in every, for the most part, I would say I have a high degree of interest in every time I speak. But I really am interested in this topic where this Sunday I'll be talking about what does a life of love really look like? Because I think Christians are confused about that a lot of times. And we're going to be taking a look at that coming up this Sunday. So that's it for now. Hey guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And may God bless you on your own personal spiritual journey. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.